Hello everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Stokes Sound Podcast. I'm your host, Ed Stokes, and today we have special guest, Zak Joshua. Zak, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Zak, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. You are super talented, and you're very good at what you do. And if you can give our listeners a little bit of information about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Zak Joshua. I've been making music, working in music for 8 to 10 years now. I make dance music. I make lots of other styles, but dance music is my main focus. I make my own music under the name Zak Joshua. I mix for other artists and other clients, work out of a studio called HQ Recording in Leicester, where I've worked for 6 years, I think. 6 years. And yeah, I do all right as a dance music artist. I had a track come out on a massive label called Selected a number of years ago that kind of really got my career going, called Figure It Out. That's probably the most well-known track that I've worked on.
Fantastic.
And since then, sorry?
I said fantastic. That's great.
Yeah.
Really
and since then, I've got a lot of new music lined up for next year, ranging from commercial dance house stuff with big vocals to underground 90s infused breakbeat type stuff. So that's what I'm working on.
Nice one. Nice. Well, today's episode is about the philosophy of mixing. We're looking at the reasons why we mix and, and what it's all about. So Zak, kind of give us a little bit about kind of your views on mixing and why we mix and what we're actually mixing for.
Mixing is finding a way to take an artist's raw vision, I suppose, whether it's my vision or another artist's vision of music that they've created, and making it sound better, sound great. It's about taking lots of different things that they've done and trying to meld it into one intelligible sound, I suppose. That's my main. That's basically what it is in a nutshell to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because so many as a mixer yourself, so many mixing engineers kind of try and figure out this like puzzle or like science project of audio and layers, and we're all trying to figure out how to put this together. And so many people do things in such different ways. And we were chatting regarding about knowing knowledge and having too much knowledge. I find can sometimes be at a disadvantage. Although we all say knowledge is power. With knowledge comes with overthinking, and sometimes, well, you know what it's like, don't you? We all overthink mixes a lot of the time, and a lot of the listeners that are listening, I know you guys all mix, and you're probably kind of mixing on day one, then another mix on day two, and then you keep going. You've spent like 4 days on this like one song, and so talk a little bit about your process, Zak, and kind of how you go about mixing.
No, you're completely right. I mean, I think we were talking earlier where, as you say, the more knowledge you have, the more you overthink. And it's true. I've only just got, in the last probably year or so, I know more than I have ever known about mixing and audio and how to make things work. And yet it's took me the last year to realize that was detrimental to my mixing. That was detrimental to the music I was making. And if you look back at my career, the one track that I've made obviously quite a few tracks that have been well received, but the one track that I made that has done really well, had millions of streams and all of that stuff. The one track that's done really well, I made when I didn't have a clue what I was doing. That's the truth. And then, when I realized that, no, it's true though. I made it in 2014, which was before I went to uni, before I went to ACM. I made it in 2014, didn't have a clue what I was doing, didn't know what mastering was. I just got told to stick a limiter on the end of it, on the end of my chain.
Just make it loud.
Yeah, no, literally. When I look back at it, I'm embarrassed, right? But do you know what's funny? I did a rework of that track for a big label called Selected. And they asked me let's re-release it. That was in 2019. So that was 5 years after the original came out. And
Right.
they said, look, can you polish it up a bit and get some new vocals done for it? Because I used a sample on the original one because that's what everyone was doing back in 2014 with house music, using old R&B samples.
Yeah.
And so I took the original project, polished it up, and every day I get messages saying, we like the new one, but the original was better. Every day. And I was like, how? It sounds so much better now. And I think it's because it's that feeling that you can't quantify. You know, that feeling that you can't quantify. And I've worked really hard in the last year to find that again. And there's a few processes that I've done. The main thing, as we were just speaking about earlier, was working quicker as opposed to overanalyzing each mix decision, overanalyzing over-referencing. You can over-reference. I think referencing is very important, but I think you can over-reference as well.
Yeah, and compare constantly. Like, oh, why does my mix not sound like this? And what I think, listeners, what you really need to think about is every song is different. And I know that you hear a lot of top mixing engineers always say the same thing, but it really is. And a lot of the time, the mix boils down to the source. What was it recorded on? How was it recorded? All of that plays a part into the actual final mix. Yes, every mixer will use a different plugin, but if you've got a acoustic guitar recorded on a completely different mic to another guitar recording, it doesn't matter what plugins you use. The actual source is different to begin with. So when you're comparing mixes, I find that as a bit of not an issue, because you should kind of compare sometimes, because it's a good thing to kind of look at other mixes and see kind of what you're doing. But I think it can also be a little bit dangerous because you've started off at a completely different source to begin with before you've even mixed the track. So that is one thing that I always
Yeah, I mean, the source is everything, and not just, like you say, that's a almost technical aspect of the source, in that if you've got one guitar. I mean, for me, when I'm recording vocals, especially main vocals, not so much backing vocals, but main vocals, I record the whole track in one day. I will, and if they want to come back and change it, like if they say, oh, I feel like I didn't hit this section right or that section right, I'll say, that's fine, we're doing the whole track again. Because I feel, no, honestly, I'm not.
What's their reaction?
They don't like it, but I don't care, because every singer sounds different on a different day. They might have gone out at the weekend. They might have been shouting. They might have, smoked some cigarettes or whatever, or had a few drinks, or they might have had a cold. Every singer sounds different on a different day. And I personally feel that you can tell. Maybe that's just me, and they don't like it, but they will do it. And then afterwards they'll be like, actually, yeah, that you were right to do that every time. No one's ever called me out for that.
Interesting.
No one's ever said, oh, I think that was a waste of time. But little things like that, in the technical sense, very important. And if you've got a guitar tone that you recorded one day, a guitar tone that you recorded another day, and they sound completely different, you've just got to embrace that they sound different. You've got to you can't make them sound the same.
Yeah.
On another note, I've lost my train of thought now.
It's very easy to do with all this information.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of information, but no, the source. You can't get a great mix if the track isn't very good, and I mean that in the nicest way possible.
It's true.
If you have a great song, mixed badly, it's still a great song.
Yeah,
that people will want to listen to. When I'm DJing, I play. I DJ at the weekends as well.
Yeah,
and I play R&B and hip hop. And there's a song that I play most weekends, which is XXXTentacion's "Look at Me." I don't know if you've heard it.
I'm not. Maybe if I hear the song, I'll know.
And it is the worst mix and master you've ever heard in your life. Really? I mean, genuinely.
I love how brutal you are.
I am. I'm very brutal. But. And do you know what? It goes crazy every week. And when I say, if you ever listen to it, you'll know what I mean. It clips, like digital clipping.
Right.
It digitally clips all over the track. It was clearly done in like his bedroom, but it's an amazing track. when you play it out live, people go absolutely crazy. And that's all that matters. It's that emotional connection. I think mixing can help to like make a track stand out. And I think it's so important. Obviously, I do it, I do it for other artists, and I spend a lot of time on my own tracks mixing. It's a very important stage, but it's all there to facilitate the song and the music. And you need a great song to start with.
I'm so glad you said that, because, for the listeners listening, it really is important to have a good song to start with. It doesn't matter who's mixed the song. If the source isn't good or the song isn't good, then you're not going to, it's like a broken chain. Everything in the chain to lead to a good mix needs to be good to begin with. And I think that's really important. And one kind of way that I look at mixing, and I know a lot of other mixing engineers kind of say the same thing, but it's all about the vibe. It's all about what works with the track, what you're feeling, and how to get that emotional sonic sound to come across in the track. So, for example, if we take any song, I will find that I tend to do some more or different vocal delays in certain sections. I know it's a little bit technical, but the reason why I do that is so I can emphasize certain words lyrically in the song, but in a sonic sound way. It's that kind of thing, and that's kind of what brings feeling to the song. And I think that's very important, that people forget, although mixing is a technical thing, it's also a musical and an emotional feeling, which I feel like sometimes can get a little bit lost. I don't know what your views are on that, Zach, but
yeah, no, you're completely right. I think I look at it. So I produce, mix, and master all of my own music. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I send tracks off to be mastered. If it's a big single, I might send it off to like one of the top guys.
Yeah.
But I do a lot of my own mastering, and I also mix and master for clients. And I look at it as the production stage is 80% creative, maybe 90% creative, and 10 to 20% technical. There's still certain things you can do at the production stage, like making sure in the electronic sense, like the drum samples are the right drum samples to use. Good sounding drum samples, tuned all correctly.
Good source again. Goes back
good
to the
source.
Yeah,
exactly. But I'd rather have a great vocal take recorded badly than a rubbish vocal take recorded well. That's my view.
Yeah.
That goes back to what I was saying. The song needs to be great.
Same thing with vibe as well. I mean, that's all about vibe.
Exactly.
There, what you're saying.
It's all about vibe. There's certain tricks you can do to kind of mask the fact that a vocalist wasn't recorded correctly, or guitars were a bit like the tone wasn't very good, but you can't mask that a guitarist can't play guitar. That's you just can't do that. So that's 80%, 20%, 80% technical, 80% creative, 20% technical. The mixing stage for me is 50% creative, 50% technical.
Okay.
And then the mastering stage is like 99% technical, 1% creative. That's my view.
Getting your levels perfect and
exactly
sure
the mastering stage.
Right.
Exactly, the mastering stage is where I try to remove all creative thoughts from my mind and just think, right, I need this to, that's where I do most of my referencing, is at the mastering stage. I very rarely do any referencing at the mix stage.
Interesting.
I do sometimes, but not very often. It's normally if there's like an issue that I can't work out where I've gone wrong.
So when you're mixing, then what are you? I mean, this is a very big question, but when you're mixing, what are you actually looking for? And are you thinking ahead of, okay, if I do that, then I'm going to do that, or are you just like, does it sound good? Like, kind of, what is your thoughts on that?
I know that when I'm mixing my own tracks, when I'm in the production stage, I will be thinking ahead to the mixing stage, and I'll be thinking, right, this is going to be a pain to mix if I don't do this or do that, or I need to. So during my production stage, I make a lot of decisions that will help me in the mixing stage. But when I'm working with other artists, I don't have that ability. I'm taking what they've given me. What I'm looking for, I mean, it's a very big question. As I said, I'm trying to bring their artistic vision to life and make it sound as good as it possibly can, for the listener to enjoy it, really. And what I'm normally looking for is something to build the track around.
Right.
I'm looking for so someone will send me a track and I'll be like, what is the most important part of this track? You know, it might be a vocal. Normally, I mean, with a pop track, it is the vocal almost every time.
Yeah.
With a dance track, it can be a bit different. With a dance track, it might be the main piano line, or it might be the drums.
Yeah, I always say if you get a kick right in a dance track, it's that's the foundation, isn't it?
That's right. In a dance track, the whole thing is based around the kick. You know,
Yeah.
the kick is so important, and it's normally on a dance track. It's normally layered with like 3 different kicks because it wants the real low end and that clicky thing on the top.
So it cuts through.
So I will often build a track around the kick, especially if it's a more underground track. But when it comes to pop music or rap music as well, the vocal is most important. So I will build it around the vocal first. I can't remember who it was at uni. One of my lecturers said, when you start a track, the Holy Trinity is the vocals, the kick, and the snare. And it doesn't really matter which one you start with, but you should always do those 3 first. I think it was either the kick or the vocals. I can't remember who it was.
Do you find that when you're mixing, you're always approaching the kick first, the snare, or the vocal first? I mean, I know you mentioned
that's what I'm
saying.
Really
matter which one, but
it doesn't really matter which one. It's normally with a pop track, it'll be the vocals. With a dance track, it'll be the kick. Normally, and then I'll build those 3 up, and then everything if it's a well-made track, most things will fall into place after that. You know, and it's about how do I control it? How do I make it feel controlled but expressive? And how does the artist's vision come out when I'm mixing this track? That's what I'm looking for anyway. That's what I'm trying to do.
Is your approach then different? So if you're not producing the track and you're just getting a client that's just sending you the track to mix, is your approach to mixing very different, little different, or is it pretty much the same?
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same. I'd say I do tend to overanalyze my own tracks more than other people's, which is not good, but I've gotten much better at it. I think that's just because I don't have that. It's almost impossible to have that emotional separation you need when it's your own music, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm getting better at that for sure. And yeah, I think my process is pretty much the same. I use mostly the same plugins. I use the same workflow as, you know, like with the mix templates and the way that I route things. It's all the same.
That's interesting you said that. I'm glad you said that because workflows are a major part, I find, of mixing. And I think mixing templates are important. And I actually know quite a few mixers that don't like to use mixing templates. They like to start from fresh. Yeah.
Really? So I'm surprised.
Yeah, honestly, like I've seen kind of all sorts of things. People are like, oh, you know, they don't want to take away from their, I guess, the vibe of the track that they felt on the day.
I get that. So I understand that. Me personally, I couldn't mix without not necessarily templates, because I have different ones. You know, I have different ones depending on the style.
Really? That's really interesting. Can you talk us a little bit more about it? Talk further about that?
Yeah. Mainly because I use the Plugin Alliance suite, I suppose you'd call it.
Yeah.
And they have lots of different console emulations. And they're all great. And I'm not going to say they all sound mega different, but they do have a bit of a different vibe. So they've got, I can't remember which ones they've got. My favorite is the AMEC. Is it the AMEC?
The EQ?
The channel strip. Let me just see if I can look at it on Logic. I bet I can't.
There's so many plugins.
Well, basically, I have different mix templates that are all the same in that they all collapse into groups. So as I'm sure you've spoke to your listeners about this before, where you'll have like 3 kick tracks all going to one kick group. Yeah. You know, 3 guitar lines going to one guitar line. So I'll have those groups. Each of those groups will have a channel strip on them. Might be SSL, might be, and this is why I have different ones. They all have different sounds. So on something that's a bit rockier, I use the Focusrite. I can't remember which number it is, but there's a Plugin Alliance Focusrite channel strip. I use that. With something that's a bit poppier, I might use the SSL E or G, one of those two. And then, but most of it is the AMEC now. I found that is my favorite.
And that changes depending on what genre you're mixing.
Mostly. As I said, most of my stuff is dance music or pop music, in which case I'll go for it's like 80% of the time I'll use the AMEC one. But I might, sometimes I'll just be like, I feel a change. Let's use the SSL one. Just for a laugh.
That's what I say to sometimes, people will say to me, what plugins are you using on the vocal? And I'll say, well, I have my go-to, but,
sometimes you're just feeling a bit spicy, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you're just like, you know what I mean? Like, let's try something else. I think obviously we have our go-tos, but all the tools do the same thing. They all work with audio. And if you're feeling like using something else just for a laugh, just do it. Do you know what I mean?
Do you know what? I've started using clippers on vocals instead of compressors.
Lots of people have started doing that. Like, people have said that that's a great way to go. It's not something I've done, but what's your thoughts on it? Is it nice?
I got the T-Rax clipper. I think they just have one clipper. They maybe have multiple ones now. I'm not sure, but it was like it's a yellow one. Mm-hmm. And I was just on
T-Rax stuff.
Sorry, say it again.
I've not used the T-Rax stuff.
Yeah, I hadn't either, and then I saw this plugin and I thought I'm just gonna, try it, and then I just tried it on a vocal, mm-hmm. and I thought, wow, the RVox by Waves, and it kind of brings it forward in your face. Yeah. This clipper kind of does the same thing, but it works. Clipper, limiters, compressors, they're all kind of similar things, but I just liked the way this T-Rax one sounded, and I just went with it. It just goes back to, does it vibe? And I just thought it sounded great. It was, quite it was like a rap melodic kind of vocal. But it just had this like punch, and I just thought, you know what? I'm not even going to use my, the UAD LA2A that I always go to. I'm going to swap it out for this clipper, and I did, and yeah. I think I'm going to be using clippers now instead of compressors.
Wow. I might give that a go tonight. I've got a track to mix later. I might have a
and I've been mixing into a clipper as well.
What, on your mix bus?
That's going to throw some people. Yeah, on the mix bus.
I mean, that's controversial. That is. That's a bit controversial. That
I do 1 dB of clipping. I set my mix bus up, and then I set all the individual stems. So I just kind of balance them, and then I just highlight everything, kind of raise it up until it hits the 1 dB on the clipper, and then I start the mixing process from there.
What does that give you on the mix bus? Like,
it just has a sound. Do you know what it does? The clipper, I find the clipper just gives you a really upfront, punchy mix, and a lot of the pop stuff I do, it's what I want.
Do you feel that it functions as an LA2A? Like, it basically is a limiter. Or do you feel like it's doing something differently?
It's more. I find it more attackive. The clipper.
Okay.
I find it a bit more like brutal. I mean, I may be wrong. I'm saying this. I mean, I don't know scientifically everything, but to me, I'm not trying to think of it as in too technical way. I'm like, I put it on. Does it sound good? Do I like it?
Oh, 100%. I mean,
if I like it, I'm keeping it.
That is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what it is. That's why I say it's controversial, but. It doesn't matter.
It's not in the educational textbooks. I get that.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter, because all we're trying to do is make stuff sound great. Like, these are just tools to help you do that. No, I don't agree with anyone that says you must do this. Like that whole, the whole your bass must be mono thing. Like, well, yeah.
Not in today's pop music. Most of it's bass.
It's all over the place, but that's the mids, you see. I mean, that most of the bass in today's pop music is really mids, and then you've got the sub underneath. But I don't care what you do to it. If you want to put a stereo widener on your sub and it sounds great, do that. Not for me personally, but
I do. Talking about the bottom end actually in mixes, one thing that I have been doing lately is I use the Plugin Alliance, the BX V3
The
Brainworks, the mix, and I use it on the mix bus, and I use the mono maker, and I mono everything that's below 40.
I use the BX Digital V3 on my master.
Yeah,
I used to use it in mix,
similar to what I'm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I used to use it. I used to use it too much. It was my favorite EQ for many years. It really is.
It is
so
great.
Oh, it's so good. And it was the first one I had that you could, because I got Plugin Alliance. The first time I got Plugin Alliance stuff, I was still at uni. So it was the first EQ that I could use where you could zero in on the frequencies and hear them independently of everything else.
Yeah,
and I was like, that is amazing. Obviously, there's loads that do that now. Slate's Infinity EQ is great, but the amount of tools that come in that one plugin, like the stereo width is an amazing tool on that plugin. But yeah, I used to use it everywhere, and I said, Zach, you got to calm down a bit. So now I just use it on the master bus.
It's like a kid in a sweet shop, isn't it? It's like
that's the thing. You got so many options. You end up like, oh, go on, let's stick that one in there, stick that one in there, and before you know it, you just got. It's just too much.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what though? Talking about kind of mixing though, I always have this thing, and I'm always like, do I mix into my mix bus or do I put the mix bus processing on later? And I've noticed that recently my view, talking about kind of the EQs and everything that you put onto the mix bus, I've started to kind of use a clipper, mono everything below 40, do a 20 hertz filter, and I start mixing into that. And then the only difference is I put the limiter at the end for the, when I send off the mix, and I keep the clipper on, but I just take the limiter off for mastering. That's kind of what I've been doing, just because I feel like if I start with plugins that are on when I'm starting the mix, it would ruin my mix to take those plugins off at the end. It's counterproductive, isn't it? Because you're using those plugins for its sound and doing what they're fundamentally doing at the start of the mix. So I feel like I'm mixing into that, and that's my glue. So why would I want to take my glue off? Right. That's kind of the way I've been looking at it. But I'm interested to hear your view on it as well.
I mean, I can see why it's a completely valid argument. I can see why you would. I personally don't, but. So just run through what you were putting on again.
So
what was it?
My mix bus would be, so I'll start off with the Slate tape. So I'll start off with some saturated, just some tape.
Love that plugin.
Yeah, it's great. But always make sure you turn the noise off.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, always. So I use that plugin.
That's the same on a lot of plugins, though. It actually really annoys me that they leave the noise on.
Oh, it's horrible. I mean,
especially on there's loads of the Plugin Alliance stuff, where you can stack it up, and before you know it, you've got this hiss.
That's the V gain, isn't it? Is it V gain?
It's the V gain. It's like just to have it on default as 0. Like, just put it on default as 0. If I want it, I will put it on. Do you know what I mean? But every single one has it on as default at max. It's like, why? Anyway, that's a moan for another time.
I love this.
It really bothers me, though. It really does annoy me. But anyway, I had to go through every plugin that I use and create a new default with the V gain at nothing.
I love
just
that.
Getting annoyed. Yeah.
So I'll use the tape then at the start of the mix bus, and then I'll go on to the Brainworks V3 mix, and I'll do the 40 hertz. Then I'll do a high pass filter, 20 hertz, take at the bottom end. That's that. And then I will then go into, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, a Spectre, which is like a saturation EQ plugin, which is great.
Who's that by?
That's going to really annoy me now.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, they're really good. Waves Factory.
Okay.
Yeah, really good. And then after that, I then go into a clipper, and then I have an L2 Pro, FabFilter Pro L2, but the L2 isn't doing anything. The gain is at 0. Put it on 0.1.
Is that the one that you're taking off at the end?
That's the one that I'm taking off at the end, because I'm going to let the mastering engineer deal with that part. Or if I'm mastering it, I'll just use that as a limiter, or that and an Oxford inflator just to get a bit more sound. and that's it. So yeah, sometimes I put the clipper Oxford inflator, then the L2, or sometimes if I don't really want the extra, if I don't want the Oxford inflator, I'll just take it out and just keep it as L2.
Got you.
Um,
So your question was, what do I do? And I wanted to kind of get, because what you're doing there is a large part of my mastering stage. So as I said before, often when I'm mixing a track, I will be mastering it as well, whether it's my own. I mean, if it's a client track, I will be mastering it like 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100. I'll be mastering a track that I've mixed for a client. With my own tracks, most of the time, apart from the really, really big tracks that I want to make sure have got that real extra sheen, I'll be mastering my own tracks. And I guess a lot of what you're doing there is what I do at the mastering stage anyway. So, but when I'm mixing, going back to the original point, I don't mix with them on.
Yeah,
I don't mix with them on because I feel like when I do that, I've tried it because everyone was like, you need to start mixing with your plugins on your master chain. And I was just like, look, I'll give it a go. And I felt like I was fighting them.
Interesting.
I felt like I was trying. Having said that, I use the Slate a lot, but I put them on that Slate tape.
Brilliant.
I often, it's a great plugin. I often put that on my groups.
What, like synth group, guitar group, or music group?
And exactly. So on my group stage, I will often, the first thing will be the SSL, the console emulators that I mentioned earlier. Then normally there will be a Slate tape and this is on each individual group. So
really? Why don't you just put it on the master out?
Because it's doing different things. Like if you're putting it on the master out, this is my opinion anyway. Right. I might be wrong, but this is when I've put it on the master, I feel like it for me personally, it mushes it up a bit too much. It is used for glue, so obviously you want it to mush it a little bit. But what I feel like it does when you put it on the individual channels, because it's treating those tracks individually, it melds it together, but in a really nice, less mushy way.
It's a bit like gain staging. Gain staging that you're talking about, because if you put it on your master, you're going to be hitting it harder than if you put it on individual.
Exactly. What I'm trying to do with my routing stage is like do it the same way the analog guys did back in the day. And there's two ways to use a tape. You can either use a 2-track tape machine for your master, for your end product.
Yeah.
Or what a lot of the guys did was use 16-track tape machines to collapse, to record like the 16 tracks individually. And that's the way I'm doing it, as opposed to the 2-track way.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think on there is a setting for 16-track, 2-track, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got
is
it FG9, and on the right hand side as well, there's another one so you can choose.
Yeah, I can't remember which one I use. I think I use different ones each time. I think I'll just sit there for about 10 minutes clicking between the two.
Yeah.
And I'll be like
10 minutes.
No, 5 minutes maybe. But I'll be like, click one. And I'm like, next one.
But that's a very valid point, what you're saying there. And that's what I really want to get the listeners to understand, that mixing, there is no right or wrong. You have to do it your way and you have to feel it. And if it sounds good to you, it is good. Like,
it's all trial and error.
Exactly.
Everyone's workflow that I've spoken to, whether it's you or anyone else, everyone's workflow is different. Like some are more similar than others. Some do certain things a certain way. You know, you might have groups the same way as I do, but what you do with those groups is a little bit different. Some people don't even have groups. You know, some people have one group stage and then another group stage and then another group stage, you know, where they collapse everything down. I mean, I do collapse my groups into a drum bus and an instrument bus and a vocal bus before the mix bus as well.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah.
I think that's the best way to do it. But yeah, like you say, and then after the tape, so I have the console channel emulations. Then I might have the tape, and sometimes I'll take it off. Sometimes I will take it off, and then I might have a ozone imager.
Oh yeah. I
might have an ozone imager. Sorry, fire alarm's going off in my flat. Believe it or not.
It's all right.
It's not in my. You shouldn't be able to hear it, but
No, it's all good.
yeah. So then I'll have an ozone
You
imager.
just said the fire alarm's going off. Do you not need to check?
It goes off. It goes off quite a lot in this building.
Right, okay.
Unfortunately,
We're sitting here recording this, and you're just like, there's a fire alarm going
right.
off.
Just let me know if you see smoke behind me. No, it's fine. It's not in my flat. It's in the bit outside.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so I like images, and again, sometimes I might have them on the groups, or I might have them on the mix bus. But going back to the original point, what you're doing with with your mix bus that you're mixing into is probably the start of my mastering chain in many ways.
Yeah.
But I mix with most of my mixes sound similar when they come out, because I'm using the same workflow that I always use, similar plugins, similar mixing style and philosophy. So I know that my mastering stage, if I can get the mix sounding how I want it to mix, my mastering stage is going to sound great.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the way that I mix is a kind of subtractive, reductive way of doing it, where I'm using the tools that we have to control the sound after the fact. So I want the track to be pumping and sound brilliant. And then I'm going to be like, right, okay, from a technical view, it sounds great, but I need to bring the low end in and tighten it up. And I find it's a lot easier to tighten something up than it is to try and inflate it. I find it's a lot easier to take frequencies out as opposed to put them in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I see that. Yeah.
So that's why I don't mix into anything. I don't mix into anything. I don't even mix into a compressor. I might stick a compressor on afterwards, like maybe the BX Townhouse, which is just the SSL.
Yeah, it's a great compressor.
Great compressor. Love that one.
Definitely has a sound though. I do notice it when you put it on.
It does.
It just has. I don't know. Sounds a bit dirtier to me, a bit more saturated.
Some tracks it really works. There was a track that was really bugging me yesterday. I've been working on it I've been mixing it for like 3 weeks on and off. Again, over complicating it, but it was just missing some punchiness. And I thought, right, let's
when you need a clipper.
Well, yeah, now I will try a clipper.
Go and get the T-Rex clipper. You'll love it.
I will do.
I'm not sponsored by them, so
yeah. Are you sure? We're all like, yeah. I mean, what about the Plugin Alliance stuff? I'm not sponsored by them either. Is there any clippers? Is there any clippers in the Plugin Alliance stuff?
Do you know? I don't know.
I'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll have a look at the T-Rex one if that's the one you're recommending to me.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I know I'm not sponsored. I genuinely, it genuinely is a really good clipper.
Picks up his T-Rex mug with his iced tea in it.
That's funny.
What was I going to say? Yeah, so I was working on this track and I just stuck this Townhouse on it and I was like, yeah. And it just added it just controlled the bottom end. And that's what I wanted. I was struggling. It was like really flabby. I'm not a fan. I mean, I use them, but I don't like multiband compressors. Controversial opinion. Don't like them.
Wow. Really? Explain more.
Just don't like them. I feel like if you have to reach for a multiband compressor, you've gone wrong somewhere. That's how I feel. Because don't get me wrong, they're good for, I know a de-esser is essentially a multiband compressor, right? So for specific jobs, they're very good at what they do. Yeah. Let's say you've got a sound that, I'm not saying I don't use them at all, because I do use them. Let's say you've got a specific sound that sounds great, except it's just got a bit too much low end, or it's too much sub, or too much high end. It's great for just taming, controlling that excess low end or high end or excess sibilance in the vocal. Great for that. But I don't like using them across a whole spectrum of a sound.
Right.
In fact,
Yeah.
I will never use them across the whole spectrum of a sound. The only time I will use them is for those specific circumstances where it sounds great, like the sound is great on a vocal, but there's just a bit too much low end or a bit too much high end. I feel like they're a blunt instrument that you can kind of, I don't want to say cheat with, because anything that makes it sound good will make it sound good. I feel like it takes me longer to get the sound right using that than other ways.
Fair enough.
Personally. Yeah.
That's interesting. Not
many. I mean, most people swear by them. It's just every time I use one, I just don't like it.
Do you use dynamic EQ at all, like the FabFilter Pro Q3, and do the multiband?
I use dynamic EQ a lot. I use it I love sidechaining them to other things. So, for instance, I use one on a bass that's sidechained to the kick, so that it ducks the low end out.
Yeah.
As opposed to a compressor, which will duck the whole thing out. I'll use the dynamic EQ from Plugin Alliance again, sidechain to the kick, and it will just bring the kick down, but leave everything else. It'll bring the low end of the bass down when the kick comes in. Leaves everything else.
Create room.
I also love doing it for vocals, as in not on the vocals, but carving out a space for vocals in the instrument mix. I might stick it on the whole instrument bus, sidechain it to the vocal bus, and just when the vocal comes in, I'll have it on like a slow attack, slow release, where it's just kind of bringing down around 2K, just give a bit of space, just to give us a bit of space for. Do you know what's the vocal?
Do you know what's interesting? You know how you made that statement of you don't like multi-bands, compressors. Do you know what I've recently started to not really like?
What's that?
Parallel compression.
Yeah, I don't use it.
Really? I just, for me, right, what does parallel right? I get it that there are reasons and there's things that you should do, I guess, parallel compression for. But I've noticed if I actually look back at everything I've done, parallel saturation is fantastic. Drive in a bit of dirt here and there is perfect. But when it's just parallel compression, I just feel like what I'm actually doing, I'm just making it louder. I could just turn it up. That's kind of, and I hear some other engineers talk about that, and it kind of all made sense to me. And I was like, actually, why, people talk about parallel compression, and yes, different workflow. There is no right or wrong way. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do parallel compression. But for me personally, every time I've used parallel compression, it's a lot of the time it's been used for a volume thing without kind of knowing if that makes sense. I'm like, oh, it sounds better because it's louder. So I just, but that's interesting that you're saying that you don't do it.
Yeah, don't use it. I used to use it. I think it's quite I think it works well for bands, for more organic sound sources.
Yeah.
That, their dynamics are all over the place, and sometimes they need a bit of reinforcement just to make it sound kind of polished, I suppose. When it comes to electronic stuff that has already been pre-processed, there's just no need.
Especially if you use Splice. Everything's all limited and compressed anyway.
Exactly. I actually really wish Splice would release their samples where they've not been so overdone, because their samples are great, but there's a few times where I've thought, oh, I like that sample, and I'll drag and drop, and I'm like, it sounds horrible. I like the idea, I like the melody and stuff, but I don't use it very often. But I do like it for drum samples. Anyway, going back to the parallel compression, I used to use it on vocals a lot. I think we used to speak about that a few years ago.
Yeah,
and then I realised that it kind of worked, but it gave me this real nasally tone and annoying tone to the vocal.
Yeah.
And it did make it sound louder. It made it sound, and I think it was more the fact that I wasn't good enough as an engineer, as a recording engineer and as a mixing engineer, to get a good vocal, and to then take a good vocal and make it sound good. I just wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And parallel compression was a way for me to get what I perceived as being a polished sound, which actually wasn't.
It just made it louder, right?
It just made it louder, basically.
And you always fancy think if it's louder, it's better.
Exactly. I don't do any of that now. I used to use it on drums. If I used to think that a drum kit wasn't like, or drum set wasn't punching through, I'd be like, right, parallel compress that bad boy. You know, it'd be all right.
Yeah.
But I don't do it at all now. I can't remember the last time I did a parallel compression.
It's interesting because what we're kind of talking about is it kind of goes into the whole thing of kind of less is more, and that you don't, to create big sounding mixes, you don't need to add all of this stuff to create it. And I think that is if anybody's going to take anything away from learning to mix, just honestly, less is more. And it goes back to what we said at the beginning of this episode was knowledge, although knowledge is power and knowledge is good, knowledge also leads to overthinking, and overthinking can lead to overcomplicating a mix, and that can then lead to a bad mix. Not always, but it can. So,
I remember when we were at uni, and this always stuck with me. We were because I don't know if the viewers will know, me and Ed went to uni together.
Yes, we did.
We went to the same university. When I was at uni, a mix engineer came in. I can't remember what his name was, but he'd worked with, I'm sure he'd won a Mercury Award or something. Like, it was a big mix engineer, and he showed us his mix, one of his recent mix projects. And what I could not get over was how there was no plugins on there. I was like, there was like 5 plugins on there, and I was like, what is going on?
The source was good. And that's
it was a great source. It was a great source. And I think he'd used a bit of outboard. But the point was, and I said, I think I asked a question, or someone asked a question, where it was like, you've not really got many plugins on there. And he was like, yeah, you don't need them. And I was like, wow. Because at that point, I mean, I was still young then. And I was like, I was using 10 plugins on each channel, because I thought that's what you were meant to do.
We all do at the start.
I was like, yeah. Bit of compression, bit of limiting, bit of EQ, bit of saturation, on a bit of reverb on every single track. And he was like, he was, I think he said it's 90% of the battle is balancing. And it is. It really is. Like 90% of mixing is balancing. You just using those faders to get the right volume levels. Especially when you're working with electronic pre-processed samples. That's even more true. Like, obviously with a dynamic sound source, like a real guitar or a vocal, you're going to need to use compression and stuff. But everything else, I mean, if you look at my mix projects, it's a shame I can't pull one up, but almost all of the projects has maybe got an EQ on it, and that's it.
Yeah.
On each channel. Maybe has an EQ if it's lucky. And then you get to the vocals, and there's like 8 or 9 plugins on that vocal chain. So almost all of the plugins are on the vocals. There's almost no plugins anywhere else. There might be a few, reverbs that it's been routed to.
Yeah.
Less is more. And within your plugins and within the mixing decisions you make, things like small EQ changes are much better than big EQ changes.
It's all about the small things. Small detail makes a major part of the overall sound, not the other way around.
Exactly.
I think the other way round actually ruins it.
Unless you're doing something creatively, like if you're, but again, that should be done at the production stage. It shouldn't be done at the mixing stage. The mixing stage should be. I know I've gone wrong somewhere if I have to make an EQ move of more than probably 1.5 dB. I won't do it. I won't do anything. I definitely won't do anything over 2 dB. 100%.
Wow.
I mean, that's not including roll-offs. And
yeah. And obviously there will be exceptions where you have to.
Of course there will. But as a general rule, I know that if I'm boosting, let's say 2K by 2.5 dBs, I've gone wrong somewhere. I've gone wrong with the balancing, maybe, or the layering, or the way that it's been done. But something's gone wrong. And I won't boost anything over 2 dB.
Interesting. Much. Well, Zak, thank you so much for coming onto this podcast. Can you give our listeners kind of 3 top tips of the philosophy of
tips.
mixing? Like, what three things can you give them to take away?
Yeah, like we said, less is more. Try to be quicker. Try to get in the creative flow. Not creative flow. I think that's the wrong term. You know, be quicker and feel the music more. That was the main issue I had when I was first starting out, was that I overanalyzed everything. When all we're here to do as mixing engineers is bring the artist's vision to life. And if you overanalyze that, you will lose that feel, that creativity. Just go with your gut, and don't over reference to other tracks. I think that's
Fantastic.
mainly it, and build your own philosophy. Like, obviously, me and Ed we've spoke about our philosophy. Everyone's is different, as we said. Everyone has different ways of doing things. Ed does his things one way, I do things another way. Another engineer will do completely. They'll say, "Oh, these two don't know what they're talking about," you know, and you should do it this way, and that's fine. Everyone needs to build their own philosophy and
have fun.
And have fun. Yeah, this is the end. I think when you're starting out, it is fun. When you're starting out, it is fun, and that comes across, even if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Then you start going down the rabbit hole and actually wanting to get good. Then things are not fun. I remember thinking, why did I decide to do this? You know, because it's so difficult. And then then it will click, and you have fun again. I'm having loads of fun at the minute making music and working on stuff, and that's just the way it goes.
That's
but
amazing.
Remember to have fun. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Zach. I know you're a super busy guy, so really appreciate you coming onto this podcast and giving our listeners information.
I've enjoyed it. I can't believe we're done already. Great.
I know. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.